We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 18a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing a situation where a person borrows money from a ger, and this ger that lent the money, so not only did the ger himself convert, but also his children, they also converted. And so then the borrower is returning the money. Let's say the ger is no longer alive. Is it appropriate or not to return the money to the ger's children? And there was a contradiction in Brises whether it's appropriate to return the money to the ger's children or not. And the Gemara is in the middle of answering the question by making a distinction between what does it mean to say when we say that the children converted along together with their father. So in one case we're talking about a situation where horaso vileidaso shelo b'kedusha, meaning to say the children were already born by the time the father converted, and so the children also converted. V'kan, but over here, shehoraso shelo b'kedusha vileidaso b'kedusha, we're talking about where the pregnancy was before the conversion, but actually the birth of the child was after the conversion already. So in that situation he's closer to being a Jew, and the way we explained it on the previous summit was in such a situation it's already more appropriate to pay the money back to the son. However, there's a bit of a machlokas which one actually is which. In other words, when is it more appropriate? When it's horaso vileidaso shelo b'kedusha or horaso shelo b'kedusha and leidaso b'kedusha? We'll take a look at Tosas first. Tosas says kan horaso shelo b'kedusha vileidaso b'kedusha. Here we're talking about where the pregnancy was before the conversion, but the child was born already after the conversion. Perish b'kuntris, so Rashi explains, Az ruach hachamim nocha himenu. Then already it's appropriate to return the money to the son. Tosas disagree, and then Tosas say Ela nira l'ri, rather it appears to the ri lefarish horaso shelo b'kedusha v'leidaso b'kedusha. On the contrary, if the child was born before the if the child with the conception rather was before the conversion, but the child was born after the conversion, so ein ruach hachamim nocha himenu. Then it's not appropriate to return the money to the child lefishu karov lios ki Yisrael, because he's already like he's Jewish already. It was already at the time he was born already the parents converted. V'yasi lechlufe l'shavi Yisrael gomer. You're going to get things confused, and you're going to believe you're going to think that this is Yisrael Gomer, and it can cause all kinds of problems. Now, what is interesting over here is that Rashi seems to go with Tosas' explanation, because Rashi over here says Vileidaso b'kedusha, if he's born already after the conversion, Heicha deleidaso shel ben b'kedusha, when the birth of the son was b'kedusha, Michlaf bi Yisrael Gomer, then it can get confused with a full Yisrael. That sounds similar to what the Ri is saying, so it could be that the kuntris that Tosas is quoting is not exactly the Rashi that we have. In any case, the Gemara is still making a distinction and saying in one of those situations it's appropriate to return the money to the son, and in the other situation it is not appropriate. And the Gemara continues, Rav Chia bar Avin Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Chia bar Avin says that Rav Yochanan says Ovid Kochavim Yoresh as Ovid Dvar Torah, and Ovid Kochavim does inherit from his father on a Doraisa level. That's similar to what Rav said on the previous Amud, but Rav Chia bar Avin Amar Rav Yochanan has a different source. T'chsiv, because it's written in the pasuk Yerusha le'esav nasati es har seir. It says that to Esav har seir is a Yerusha. So you see there's a concept of Yerusha on a Doraisa level, even by Ovid Kochavim. But the Gemara says that's not a good source. V'dilmi Yisrael mumar shani. Maybe when we're talking about a Yisrael who's an apostate, that's different. In other words, maybe Esav is considered like a Jew who's a mumar, and so therefore you can't bring a proof from that pasuk. And so the Gemara says Ela mehacha. Rather, from here, from the following pasuk is the source. Ki livnei lot nasati es ar Yerusha talks about the fact that the bnei lot they get a Yerusha. So again, you see the concept of Yerusha by Ovid Kochavim on a Doraisa level. And the Gemara says, Rav Chia bar Avin, my time alomer karava. Rav Chia bar Avin, why doesn't he say the same source that Rava says that was from V'chishav im konehu, the one who acquired and not Yorshe konehu, and that implies that there is such a concept of Yerusha. And to that, Rav Chia bar Avin says to Rava, Miksiv V'chishav im konehu, v'lo im Yorshe konehu. Does it say in the pasuk explicitly that you do an accounting with the one who purchased him and not with the Yorshim? And again, that whole drush, essentially, it's not based on something explicit in the pasuk, it's based on something that we're inferring from the pasuk. We're inferring from the pasuk that there's at least a concept of Yerusha by Ovid Kochavim, but Rav Chia bar Avin says again, it's not explicit in the pasuk, it's just by inference. That's why Rav Chia bar Avin doesn't bring that pasuk. V'Rava my time alo amar Rav Chia bar Avin, and Rava, why doesn't he say like Rav Chia bar Avin? Why not bring the pasuk of Ki livnei lot nasati es ar Yerusha? And to that the Gemara says Mishum kevodo di Avraham shani. There we're talking about the honor of Avram. That's an inheritance of Avraham's family, and so maybe it's different over there. There was Yerusha over there due to the kavod of Avraham, but that would not apply in other situations. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Yesh be'ivri she'ein be'ivriya, there are halachas by an Eved Ivri that don't apply to an Amo Ivriya. V'yesh be'ivriya she'in be'ivri, and there are halachas by an amo ivriya that don't apply by an eved ivri. Yesh be'ivri shu yotze b'shanim u'v'yovel u'v'misas ha'adon. By the eved ivri, you have the halachas of leaving after 6 years at the yovel, and also with the death of the master. Ma she'in kein be'ivriya, that's not true by an amo ivriya, and this will be explained by the Gemara. V'yesh be'ivriya, and there's also halachas by the ivriya. Sharei ivriya yotze b'simonim, the ivriya she leaves with the signs of maturity. Ve'enan nimkeres v'nishnes, she can't be sold and resold. Umaften oso bal korcho, and you could also redeem her against his will. Ma she'in kein be'ivri, that's not true when it comes to an eved ivri, and again this will also be explained in the Gemara. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Mar, the master said, Yesh be'ivri she'en be'ivriya. There are halachas by an eved ivri that don't exist by an amo ivriya. Uramini, the Gemara says, we have the following contradiction. Yeseira olav amo hivriya. It says that amo hivriya has an additional halacha. She can go free in additional fashion. Shekona atzma b'simonim, that she can acquire herself with simonim, with the signs of maturity. And so therefore it seems that the amo hivriya does have the laws of the eved ivri. She just has an additional. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Kagon sheyiyada. When we say over here that an amo hivriya doesn't have any of the halachas of an eved ivri in terms of going free, we're not talking about a typical case of an amo ha'ivriya. We're talking about an amo ha'ivriya where the adon actually married the amo ha'ivriya, and then she doesn't go free in any of the fashions that an eved ivri normally goes free. But the Gemara says, Yeda, but if he married her, so pshita, it's obvious, of course. Gita boy, there she requires a get. Of course she doesn't leave, let's say, with the years or the yovel, etc. She requires a get. But the Gemara says, no, you might not have known that. Mahu detema, what might you have said? Lo levat lehilchasa mina, that the other halachas of how she goes free, that's not bottle just because she got married. Maybe you would think she could leave in these same fashions. Kamash molan, and that's what we're teaching over here. We're teaching over here that if there was yud, then the only way that she can leave the master is through a get. But the Gemara says, if so, amay yotze b'simonim. So it says that she leaves with simonim when she has the signs of maturity. But if there was yud, she needs a get. It's not true. She doesn't leave with the signs of maturity. And the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, this is what the Brisa means to say, Im lo yiyada yotza af b'simonim. What it means is, if there was no yid, if he did not marry her, so then she leaves even with simonim, in addition to the normal ways that an eved ivri leaves his master. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. We said above, ve'inun nimkeres v'nishnis, she cannot be sold and then sold again. That's talking again about the amo ha'ivriya. And the Gemara says, Mechlal de eved ivri nimkar v'nishna. That implies the amo ha'ivriya cannot be sold a second time, but it sounds like the eved ivri is able to be sold a second time. V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso, so b'gnei vaso, you can sell a person in order to pay, let's say he can't pay for his theft, you sell him as an eved ivri. V'lo b'kfela, but not for the double. Let's say by geneva there's a fine that you have to pay double, but if he can't pay the fine, for that you don't sell him as an eved ivri. And similarly, b'gnei vaso, you sell him for his theft. V'lo b'samama, well, let's say he's an eid zomim about a theft, and now he has to pay, because the halach is that an eid zomim has to pay kasher zamam, what he tried to do. The false witness has to pay what he tried to do to the defendant. But again, if he can't pay, if he's the eid zomim and he can't pay, you're not going to sell him as an eved ivri for that. And also b'gnei vaso for his theft, kevon shenimkar pamachas, which means to teach us, once he's sold one time, shuv iyato rashoy l'mocher, he can't sell him a second time. And so you see over here clearly that by an eved ivri also, he's not able to be sold a second time. Amar Rava says, Lokash is not difficult. Kan b'gneva achas, kan b'shtei genevos. In one case we're talking where there was one theft. In another case we're talking where there was two thefts. Meaning to say, if there was one theft and he can't pay it, and even being sold one time as an eved ivri is not enough, but you don't sell him a second time to pay off the one theft. But for two thefts already, so then you would sell him a second time. Amar le Abaye, but Abaye said to him, b'gnevaso tuva mashma. When you say for his theft, that could imply more than one theft. And so therefore, why are you saying that by two thefts you can sell him twice? It doesn't seem to be the case. We should make the same drasha for his theft, and you don't sell him a second time for his theft. And the Gemara says, Elamar Abaye, rather Abaye says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan ba'adam echad, kan b'shnei b'nei adam. In one case we're talking about where there was just one person he stole from. In the other case where there were two people he stole from. If he stole from two people, so then you could sell him a second time. Rashi says, Elakan ba'adam echad, she'amad b'din b'vasachas. You have a case where one person, and they go to court all in one shot. Eino nimkar v'nishna afilo b'gnevos harbe. Even if it was multiple thefts, he doesn't get sold again. Da'avedumyo da'achas hakasav hotzia b'loshin yachid. That's all the same thing as one theft. Aval b'shnei b'nei adam. But if it's two people, shema'amidim oso shtei pa'amim b'din, they take him to court, two individual people, two separate times they take him to court. So in such a situation, when they take him two times, nimkar b'shvil kalachas v'achas, he's sold for each one separately. V'u'adinim ganav ve'amad bedin v'nimkar v'chazer v'ganav mishiyatzachav shechozer v'nimkar. The same would be true, let's say, for example, he stole, he went to court, he was sold, and then he stole again after he was freed, so then again he could be sold again. That would be the same. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Gnevo elef v'shava chamesh meos, let's say he stole 1,000 and he's worth 500, Nimkar v'chozer v'nimkar, so then he can be sold, and he can be sold again because he's not worth enough to cover the Gneva. Gnevo chamesh meos, if he stole 500 v'shava elef and he's worth 1,000, he's worth more than the Gneva, Eino nimkar klal, in that case he's not sold at all. Rabbi Eliezer says, if the amount he stole is the amount he'd be worth if he sold him as the Eved Ivri, Nimkar, then he can be sold. But if it's not the same amount, Eino Nimkar, he is not sold. Amar Rava says, in this particular argument, Rabbi Eliezer is correct. He's more correct than the Rabbanan. What's the difference in the case where he stole 500 and he's worth 1,000, he's worth more than what he stole? The Ein Nimkar, where there we say he's not sold, the Nimkar Kulo Amarachmana, because the idea is that he has to be fully sold to cover the theft. Velo Chetzio, not if you're just selling half of him. So if you're already saying that logic, Hachanami, Nimkar Bigneva, so Amarachmana. Say the other way also, it says that he sold for his theft. Velo Nimkar Bechatzi Gneva, so you're not going to sell him for half of his theft, meaning in the opposite situation as well. In a situation where he's worth less than the amount. Let's say he stole 1,000, he's worth only 500. So again, Rabbi Eliezer is correct. You're not going to sell him and then sell him again because you're not supposed to sell him for just half of the theft. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. We said above, Umaftino sab al karcho, when it comes to the Amo Hevriya, we can redeem her against his will. Sava Rava Lamema, Rava thought to say Bal Karche Diadun. What we mean to say over here is that we can redeem her against the will of the master, meaning to say we can force the master to free her, we can redeem her in that fashion. Amar le Abaya said to him, "My niu, what would that mean exactly? To chasavna le shtara adame, that we're going to write a star on the value, on the money that's owed to him. In other words, we'll say that here's a star, she owes you the money when she's able to pay you. Amai, why should that be the case? Why should we force the adon to free her in that situation? Nakit marganisa biyada, he has a pearl in his hand right now. Yahivna le chasban, we're going to give him a shard, we're going to give him a document that's essentially meaningless at this moment. Elamar Abaya, rather Abaya says, what does it mean that we redeem her against his will? It means Bal Karche Diav, it means against the will of the father, meaning we can force the father to redeem her, Mishum Pagam Mishpacha, because otherwise to have a maidservant in the family, that's a Pagam, that's like a blemish for the family, and therefore we can force the father to redeem her. But the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, Eved Ivri Nami, when it comes to an Eved Ivri also, we're trying to make a distinction here between an Eved Ivri and an Amo Ivri. Why should we make the distinction? Nichfinu Livnei Mishpacha, we should force the family members to redeem him, Mishum Pagam Mishpacha, because of the concern of the blemish this will have to the family. And the Gemara says to that, it's different by an Eved Ivri, because Hadar Azul Umazvin Nafshe, because he might go ahead and sell himself again later anyway. So to force the family to redeem him when he's just going to go ahead and sell himself again, that's not appropriate. But the Gemara says, Hachinami here also, if you're going to force the father to redeem his daughter, Hadar Azul Umazvin, why won't he go ahead again and sell her again? The Gemara says, no, that's not going to happen, Hakatani, because we already learned, Eino Nimkeres V'nishnes, she isn't sold and then sold again, and that's why the Amo Hevri is different than the Eved Ivri. And the Gemara continues, Umani, now who is the author over here? Rabbi Shimon, the author is Rabbi Shimon. Titania, as we learned in a Braisa, Mocher Adam Esbito Leishos Veshona, a person can sell his daughter off to be a wife, he can sell her into marriage and then do that again. Let's say she's divorced or she becomes widowed. L'shivchos v'shona, he can sell her to be a shivcha, and then v'shona li'ishas achar shivchas, and then after she's a shivcha, he can then sell her to be a wife after she was a shivcha. Avalo l'shivchos achar ishas, but he's not allowed to sell her to be a shivcha after he's already sold her to be a wife. Rabbi Shimon says, Kashem shein adam mocher espito l'shivchos achar ishas, just like a person can't sell his daughter to be a shivcha after selling her to be a wife. Kach ein adam mocher espito l'shivchos achar shivcha. So too, a person can't sell his daughter to be a shivcha after he's already sold her to be a shivcha. And the Gemara continues, Uvepluksa dahani tanoi. This is the same machlokas we find of the following tanoim. The Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, bevigdo ba, if he's already done wrong by her, this is talking about a situation where he decides not to do yiyud. So it says in the pasuk, Imroa be'enei adonai asher lo ya'oda v'hefta. Again, you have a situation of the master, he's not taking her to be a wife, so la'am nachri lo yimshol l'machra bevigdo ba, he shouldn't sell her to the non-Jews, and that they shouldn't rule over her, he shouldn't sell her because he's already acted deceitfully with her, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis.